Thank you for that, Ty. Let's move on to Holly and see how it works actually on the ground for a producer.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen as well. So we did not do it this year because we opted not to buy yearlings with the high price of them last fall. So we actually took in pasture cattle this year, and nobody wants to pay the extra fee to collar their animals. So we did not use it this year, but we do plan on putting it back to use next year. So last summer we did it on 300 yearlings. And I will say that we were probably one of the clients that really pushed the buttons of events. And we knew we were going to push hard. And so our expectations weren't set super high because we knew we were going to have probably some more failure than most people who run with cow-calf pairs in larger pastures. So Ty just told you this was what the base station looks like. And yes, so we're down by Billings. We don't get the high gusts or the high winds that up on the Rocky Mountain front do, but we do get, 50 to 60 mile an hour gusts. And actually, we've never, ever had a problem with our tower. So putting it on is kind of a challenge. We highly recommend a squeeze chute or like a silencer because, especially with yearlings, probably cows too. I mean, they don't like anything around their heads. And so putting them on, we highly recommend, like Ty was saying, so if you look in this picture, there's a zip tie there. That's the system that we were on when we used them. And I sat and put that one side of the zip tie on the chain prior to working them through the chute, which did speed it up, but it is probably about 5 minutes an animal. Hopefully the carabiners make that a little quicker. Trying to figure out the length of your chain was a problem that we had, and we ended up having to recollar 50 of them because we got them too tight. So once we figured out how many chain links to go up for a yearling, then the process went more smoothly. So this is the training pen that we used. They recommend little, like 170, 180, maybe 200 acres. Ours was 173. Two parts of the fence line were permanent, and then the one running in the middle and over were temporary. So we did an electric fence. We had 100% containment in the 4 days that you train. And I will say that the training process is it's pretty amazing how fast these animals learn. Our yearlings were on electric fence prior, so maybe cows that hadn't seen electric fence might fight a little bit more, but we had really good results with our training. This looks like a mess, but so we were about 2,500 acres is where we ran the fence collars, and this was a 640 acre pasture. And this is where I'm going to tell you that we really pushed the system. So early on, I learned that if I moved my borders outside of a permanent fence, it would help the battery life because we have really good border fences. And there was no sense putting the shock mechanism nor the sound right on top of that fence. So you'll notice the fence is offset from this white permanent fence is what that is right there. So we started out with 300 yearlings by June 15th, which we collared everything and had them collared by May 20th. By June 15th, we removed 47 of them, only because it just seems like that we literally put them in a file on the software that said problem children, because they really were just problem children and we were never going to keep them in. And so we ended up removing them. But our average pasture size was anywhere from 87 to 120. Now that is inside the boundary of the sound barrier, not the actual pasture size. And so I think when I started out creating the pasture, it was anywhere from 110 to 120. And by the time you put in your sound and shock barriers, it was right around that 87, 80 sometimes. We grazed them for 7 to 10 days. So we had them in this smaller pasture for that long, 300 yearlings, after the 15th, it was 250. The short history of this ranch, when we bought it, the previous owner had openly grazed 15 days on in all 4 of the pastures that he had during the growing season. And then he'd come back on, later in the season, back to that pasture for another 15 days. When we got it, we rested pretty much the entire 2022 graze season. Oh, and just so you know, so these are, we did 7 moves in this 640 acres. And so these white lines show where I drew my original pastures. And you have to remember, you have water systems that you have to work around, making sure that there was a big overlap, because you do not want that shock getting close to that water source. A friend of ours had that problem, and animals were getting shocked in the reservoir because he didn't give it enough room. So this was our first pen after the training pen, and we did have 100% compliance. And so that was pretty awesome. And just so you can see the colors. So when they're yellow, then when the cows are yellow, when you make a new pen, it sends a signal to the collars. And so as the collars are gathering the data, your animal will be yellow. Once the collar has downloaded all of the new data, the pasture data, it'll turn black. If a battery is low, or you're having, basically if the battery is low, you'll have a red cow, or if there is no data being transmitted to that collar. So there you go. So this was later on in the season, we were finding quite a few of the red animals. But the interesting thing is a lot of those red animals were not out of the fence line. Because we all know yearlings are very much a herd animal, and they really didn't move away from their herd. So it wasn't like I think we had maybe 10 to 15 yearlings out all the time, couldn't keep them in even after the 47 left, but it was okay because they'd always stay pretty close. And ironically, none of them were red collars. So they just didn't care if they got shocked. And I don't know if this is going to play or not, but this is a heat map that Ty was talking about, but you can actually see their movement. So this was a movement over a 6-day span. So you can see where they go, where they utilize, where they don't utilize, how long they stay at water sources, and so on. So we grazed from May 18th to August 25th. These are our 4 pastures that the previous owner had placed. We were able, with the collars, we were able to rest 2 of the pastures and only graze the other 2. So honestly, we ran 250 yearlings on a little over 1,100 acres in this amount of time. And like I said, we really taxed these collars as far as their battery life. These are the zip ties that Ty was talking about. See how they're frayed. We did start losing quite a bit toward the end of the season. I commend Vents for changing this. And, it was a really bad fly year last year. So part of this breakdown could also be that the fact that they were just swinging their heads so much, trying to get out of the flies. But we did find quite a few collars on cattle trails, just with no obstructions that they could have caught the collar on. These black links right here are your breakaways. And we did have a few of them did break, which was good because one got caught on a tree and it broke off fine. One, when we had first initially collared them, got caught in the corrals before we even took them out, and it did break away right away. So that's pretty much our experience with the collars on our yearlings. We set them at a good length. We didn't have to get them back in during the middle of the grazing season and loosen them up. By the end, there were some that were getting pretty tight. So we just kind of watched those animals. But, you know, by then we were pretty much ready to take them off anyways. So, yeah, I think that's all I have, Trina. So if anybody has any questions for me, I'm happy to answer.
So I want to know how loosely you put them on, and maybe I can chime in here too. Between, you know, yearlings are obviously growing throughout the summer. So how loosely did you have to put them on to allow for that growth and not choke them by the end of summer?
So we found our sweet spot, and this is hard to explain, but we went 6 links down on the collars on each side. It was what we ended up going. And Vince will say, you know, make sure you have a fist room between the collar and the neck. Well, that's just hard when that's just not a really good indication. And the other thing that as we were collaring, we found that if they lowered their head and the collar, you know, moved down to the back of their ear, there was some movement in it. We thought that was good. But typically, you know, it would have been helpful, I feel, for Vince to kind of give maybe more of those guidelines when we were putting them on, just to say, hey, this is what has seemed to work. Maybe try here first, go, you know, 6 links down on each side for a yearling. Maybe it was 3 for a cow. And then everybody's cow sizes are different. So then you could, it would have been a lot less time consuming if we maybe had a little bit more direction there. But overall, I felt Vince's tech support was very good. So
yeah, as far as fitment, on just regular cow calves, so on cows, we like to see being able to pull that collar up to 1 ear and not coming off. And then with stockers or young yearlings, we like to see a fist, which obviously, like she said, it's not going to be cookie cutter for any cow. It could change back and forth, right? So, I mean, that's going to be up to the rancher. I know you talked about collaring, how you connected one side before the other. Once you get used to it, maybe the first 5 or 6, you kind of see where the measurements are at or what links are working. And then typically it does go faster as you go down the line to, all right, now we can start hooking up one side and then throwing one over. And that can be done by one person at that point. And once you do get your measurements down and whatnot.
So is Vince working on a model maybe of like, if you have 900-pound cows, this is about where your change should be. If you have 1,200-pound cows, this is about, so that producers have some idea of where to start.
Correct. We do send that out now. It's just like we say, it's just tough for us to tell you exactly something that may not be exactly right. But yeah, you do get documents and stuff like that on fitment, exactly sizing and stuff like that will help.
Thank you.
I will say too, Trina, on our pastures, when we did them that tight, it was amazing to see when you move them out, you could see a direct line in your grass. I mean, it was a line, like there was a fence there. And I will say this year that pasture looks incredible because it has actually been rested all season. And I don't know if it's because we hit it harder with less time, but more animals in the area, in the smaller paddocks. But we felt like it did help our grazing without us having to do all the labor to put in the electric fence. Because honestly, we hay and we were just too thin. And so I do think that's where virtual fencing will help in the future, is that labor aspect. And I also will say really quick that World Wildlife Fund actually helped us fund that, because if you penciled it, honestly, it doesn't pencil. It's really hard to make that full cost fit into your budget. And so we did get a cost share program through World Wildlife Fund's RSVP program, and they paid 50% of those collars and the tower. So
when you're talking about moving to a new pasture, you just go on your phone app or your computer or whatever and shut that fence line off and turn the next one on, and then they just move themselves? Is that how, like, you don't even have to go out there? In theory?
no. So honestly, I would highly recommend, not doing that. Like there's like the ladder approach where you can just keep like moving the electric fence slowly. So it keeps moving the cattle down to an area. That is one way. I firmly recommend that, it's just a really good way to go out and look at your cows anyways. So you wouldn't want to do that. But how we did it is I would set up the next pen and I would give us 45 minutes to move. And so I also, this is kind of hard to explain, but I actually put 2 pens on top of each other. One had a gate that was open so the animals could move through just in case we felt like we weren't going to make it in that 45-minute period, but at least there would be some boundary so they wouldn't go out of the fence, that the pasture that we were moving them into. And so I had them about 15 minutes apart. So I had the one fence with the gate. I had that set at 45 minutes for us to move the cows. And then at 45 minutes, that fence went away, and then the other one had that side closed. And so they were still going to be confined. They weren't going to move out of it, and we just sat there and watched them. So we would just sit and watch and make sure. And from your computer program, you can kind of tell where your fence line is just by, land, landmarks. So yeah, we would just sit and watch them for 15 and that's how we did it. But we would move them manually or, on foot, whatever.
In your flip flops. Any more questions for Holly? Go ahead, Lori. Sorry, I couldn't hear you.
Oh no, I was just I'm trying to think. Sorry, I could turn my camera on too. I'm just trying to think of how this all works. And so I was just kind of curious, Holly, do you have any issues with predators in your area that you live in there? You said east of Billings, correct?
Yeah, I mean, the only predator would be coyotes, but so I would say no.
Okay, I was just curious if you could tell if you had any coyotes visiting. And then the recording that you get, how long do you get a recording? Do you have a recording the minute they go on till the end, or is it like a daily recording of that heat map that you made?
Ty, maybe you
Yeah,
could.
you can run those back to 2 weeks
2 weeks. Okay.
previous, right? So yeah, so you can run 2 week scripts if you want. And you can also get it down to the individual animal too, if you want that as well, to track that.
Thanks. Was just curious.
Well, how often do the locations update on the colors?
Yeah, so you can change this and make it personal to you, but how it's set is GPS is set if it's inside 10 yards, it's every second. If it's inside 20 yards, it's every 5 seconds, then it jumps. Or outside 100 yards, and it's every 30 minutes. So that's the factory setting, but like I said, you can make it personal to yourself. And some people make it longer because they want to conserve battery life because they know they're pushing it like Holly talks about, etc. Some people want it the opposite way because they're not worried about battery life. So it's all just depends on what you want.
And I will say too, I forgot to mention this, but our batteries only lasted about 2.5 months with those type of grazes. So that's why we ended our grazing in August 25th, is because we were just getting too many dead batteries. And so the cool thing is too, is that when you find a collar, like if you move the cows, but there's a few cows that are still in the pen, they're not really cows, right? But the collar's there. And so you can get the GPS coordinates off of the computer program. And I took my side-by-side, wrote down the coordinates, put it into my phone, and it does get you really pretty close to those collars. There's some where you go out there and you can search and there's no collar. So either it was just the last known location of that collar, but which is still attached to the cow, but now the battery's dead, or the collar was already dead when it hit the ground, right? So I just went out and was walking through a pasture the other day and found one from last year. So, I mean, it's not foolproof, but we did recoup a lot of those collars that were lost.
What GPS system are you using, Ross? For the Vance system?
I don't have that answer for you. I don't know what GPS system we use.
It's not, you don't know if it's Global Star or Iridium or
I do
Argos?
not. Nope.
Okay.
I can get you that answer though if you need it.
Oh, no, that's okay. I would just say from experience with radio collars, there are different systems that will work better at our latitude and longitude than
Okay.
other systems. So just,
Okay.
yeah, from dabbling in radio collars for 20 years.
Any more questions for Holly? All right, let's move on to Brandon then.
Okay, I will share my screen. Is that working?
Not yet.
Oh, I may not. Hang on, I haven't done this before.
That's okay.
There.
There you go.
Okay, so my name is Brandon Arpan. I am one of the managers of Fox X Ranch. We are extreme southeast Montana. You can't get any more in the corner than what we are. We've got not very many animals collared. We only have about 90 or so animals collared at the moment because I'm trying to grow our operation to take over from my parents and my grandparents. So we're growing. Overall, the ranch is fairly big. So we get about 12 inches down here in the corner, about 30 inches of snowfall. We pretty much always have a breeze down here with some fairly strong gusts. Our winter temperatures average at about 10 degrees, but I mean, this past winter we got down to -60 for 2 weeks. Our summers have been getting hotter this year, especially. We've spent a lot of time up into the 90s and hundreds. We don't really can do any farming. We usually feel pretty good if we can get a ton to the acre. For what our operation's running on, we're running on about just over 5,000 total acres, which a little bit of that being BLM. We've got 66 pairs, 25 yearlings, 4 bulls. And then overall for everything that I'm trying to grow into, about 36,000 acres, half of which is public land and the rest being all private. And when you start adding everything up, 570 pairs, 600 yearlings. So theoretically we could, I'm pretty sure we could get up to 1,000 pairs, but that'll be a little bit. So what sets East Shepherd apart? So while No Fence was definitely the very first to commercially launch, East Shepherd was the very first to really get into the technology with their original company of Agrisons, which is out of Australia. That they started developing it really, for what I know, back in 2014, and they started putting kind of media about 8 years ago. They're solar powered neck bands. There's 2 different systems. One that they call the low raw system, which uses base stations. So only the base station has to see the cellular network, and then they run a second system where every individual caller has to see the cellular network because there is no base station. And I can talk about those here a little bit more in depth. And I don't work for the company, I'm just a user, but because we are one of the very first ranches in the United States that bought onto this technology for East Shepherd, I've had a lot of communication with several different people within the company, from animal welfare to their tech to the sales rep, all of that. Firmware upgrades the farmer rancher owns all of the equipment, the base stations, the collars, everything. And I'll get into the cost a little bit more later. Firmware upgrades happen basically on the ranch, or will happen on the ranch via something that they call the Wi-Fi station. The nice thing about East Shepherd is that Gallagher makes a whole lot of different cattle products, and this integrates with their different cattle products, whether it be their weigh scales, their like RFID readers, etc. Animal performance apps. Their customer service has been, at least for our experience, just absolutely like astounding. It's been really nice, even though half the techs are all in Australia. But they're definitely like late to the game, and that's because they simply weren't willing to field inferior product. In fact, I'll show it on the next slide. It used to be a completely different design, and that was when it was still Agrisons. Gallagher bought Agrisons back in 2020, and instead of commercially launching like they were going to then, because I've been talking with Agrisons for about 7 years, trying to get get this stuff. And I did explore like the fence option. You know, I talked to Frank Wooten, the CEO. No fence, and we just decided to wait for eShepherd. But they completely redesigned their product before they ever product launched because they just found it wasn't quite good enough. There's no contract minimum for eShepherd. So we use the base tower model called the low raw system. Hopefully that video is kind of playing a little bit. They say that it has a range of 4 miles. We've seen that, well, technically, yes, at least in our situation, you can kind of see our landscape. It is mostly true. The farther you get out from the base station, eventually the collar will, like if you change it to, you know, the mob to a new virtual paddock, it'll happen, but it might take a few hours. Like we've seen, if they're within 2 miles, it's probably each color is going to get updated within really 10 minutes, if not like, and the most would be an hour. Between that 2 to 3 mile mark, most colors will update within like the first hour. You'll have a small portion that'll update between 1 and 2 hours. Very rarely will they take really more than 2 or so hours. Once you start pushing to 4 miles, you might have a few colors that might take upwards of like 4 or 5 hours to update that there's a new virtual paddock turned on for them. And we have seen that if we're pushing it way outside of the range like that, most of the herd will get like a new virtual paddock, and then there will be a few that are still waiting, you know, to get that update to their collar, and they'll be just kind of stuck in the old paddock wanting up. They'll go, and we've seen a year or two just push through even the shocks to get to the herd. So there is some complications when you're starting to push out that far, but it's pretty rare that we've noticed any problem. We've had very few escapes. We've had very few like problems in that regard. For the base station, it's a solar panel. You can see it's a very trim, very like slim base station. There's not a heck of a lot to it. It goes up, I want to say it's about 30 feet, all said and done. And it's charging, or they recommend just one 12-volt, 100 amp hour deep cycle battery. The guide wires we installed at our own cost because the feet have these ground screws that go into the ground. And while we have very heavy clay soils, which should do great at retaining the system, because we get such high winds, we didn't feel that it would be quite enough. And the individual that sold the system, his name is Charles Liebergreen. He did mention that they had some ranchers down in Texas that were kind of like the pilot programs. They did guide wires and have never seen a problem. We've never seen a problem with all of our wind. It's never even partly been an issue. If you're wondering why I have it fenced around, it's because our base station is actually in a pasture where we run summer yearlings, and they don't, like 600 of them, so they're not collared. And yearlings being yearlings, if I didn't put electric fence around it, they would have probably rubbed the darn thing down. They do say that, you know, we could make this mobile if we wanted. There's a few ranchers in Australia that have made it mobile, and they were very willing to, you know, link us up with them. That way we could ask them how they've done it, the lessons they've learned. But they do warn us that if we make it mobile, we'll void the warranty on the base tower. So here's the neck band. In the upper right hand corner, you can see what it used to look like. So if you were to Google search it, you'll probably see a lot of pictures using that. They found that old design just it wasn't great for repelling water, and then the way it was delivering the stimulus, the shocks. If you had a particular hairy breed like, you know, Scottish Highlanders, it wasn't always great at delivering that shock. So they redesigned it when Gallagher bought the company, and that's what the main picture is. It's got an integrated RFID tag, which, like Gallagher's different RFID like wands will read. If you put them on a weigh scale, it can you know, go ahead and do that. And then it's been waterproof, or it's completely waterproof. We've watched animals have this thing submerged for, you know, upwards of like 2 hours and without any problem. I've got a picture of it. on the next slide of it getting totally like chunked down in mud and still not having a problem. They do recommend that the animal has to be at least 200 kg or 440 pounds before you put this on them. If the battery is completely charged within the collar, it can go for 8 days without any sort of sunlight whatsoever. It plays a rising tone as a stimulus before it delivers the stimulus, and it won't give any more than 3 stimuluses before it basically gives up, saying, for some reason I can't keep the animal contained, it's out, and then it alerts you, hey, this animal, depending on your settings, because you can customize that, of, you know, if it has to be one animal, multiple animals out for, you know, 30 minutes or half an hour or whatever really you want, before it will tell you, hey, this animal or these animals are out and you got to go fix it. Although, especially with how dry it is this year, we haven't had to go get the very few who have escaped. They've just gone back to the water source and recaught themselves, basically. So the collar will essentially talk to the base station, updating its position every 10 minutes. Now it's constantly going with the GPS to know where it is and to be able to, you know, adjust the animal for the within the virtual paddock constantly. So it just doesn't necessarily constantly report that to the base station to help preserve its own internal battery. But like I said, it essentially every 10 minutes will tell the base station, hey, this is where I'm at, and it'll do a ping for you. That doesn't necessarily mean the base station is talking to the collar every 10 minutes, which is why sometimes if you get way on the outside of that range, it can sometimes take a while for the tower essentially to tell the neckband, hey, there's new virtual paddock that I need to give to you. If there's no reception between the collar and the base station for whatever reason, the virtual paddock is stored within the collar, so it will still keep them in whatever you've drawn without any issue. It'll notify you if the animal is down for too long or if the neckband has even slipped. And I've actually got a screenshot of that to show here in a minute. If the neckband is out of communication with the base station more 24 hours, it's supposed to notify us. There's a bug in the system right now. It won't notify us. It'll just change its icon on the either like the web app to show you that it's been out of communication for 24 hours. But it's supposed to send a notification. I've identified that bug to them and they're trying to work on it. The collars have a lifespan of about 10 years, so they should go quite a while. This is obviously, it's my wife just interacting with the virtual boundary, and she's not getting shocked because that's a rubber top link for the neckband. It'll only deliver the shocks through the actual chain link on either side, but it plays that rising audio tone. This is when you get neckbands, they're actually hibernated and use that little magnetic key to put it at a certain spot, and that's when you heard that rising tone. That's us unhibernating neckbands, and that's what triggers the collar to actually start talking to the base station and trying to, you know, get everything, you know, going good. And you can actually put them back into hibernation if you're not using some, so that they don't use the batteries fast. So this is, like, I like to talk about the, you know, the bad and the good. We didn't have a heck of a lot of rain this spring, but we had a little bit, and you can see on the left, and you can actually see how it looks on the animal itself. There's not a whole lot of chain. It's that top rubber neckband, and it's very easy to adjust the chain. It's very quick when you're putting them on the animals for the first time, or if you ever need to readjust, because we actually put some that were too loose. They have training videos of how to do it, but as I think it's Holly that just mentioned, you know, if the cow's head is down, it changes, you know, the thickness of their neck, and we didn't really realize that, so we ended up with some too loose. Able to fix it at branding time without an issue, but even though they got that muddy, it still had no problem. The one on the right, we actually, not because of the system, it's just because of this, how dry this year was. We had a few that got in the creek and got bogged down, and a few actually shoved one girl's head down in the mud and killed her. But after we pulled the collar off of her and it was caked in mud, even when it was caked in that kind of mud, it was still talking to the base station saying, hey, this is where I'm at. And then we left the mud on, and it continued to talk to the base station just fine for days, like really that whole week, like it was supposed to, before finally it was giving us a low battery warning. Oh, and you can see also a little bit, the top link a little on the right hand picture, a little bit more closely. You can see this is actually the old design for the top link. They redesigned it because you can see these perforated holes. That's what like the tearaway point. So if it ever gets caught, it'll easily tear away. They actually found that they were overly conservative with the braking strength. It used to be rated, or those ones are rated at 200 kg, and they found that that was just way too conservative, and they purposely were overly conservative that way because no one wants an animal to get caught on something and die. So they've slightly redesigned that top link so it has a 380 kg breakaway strength, and as we've had a few break, because they were rubbing on something and it caught and tore away. They've just sent us new top links for free. They haven't charged us for anything. They sent us a few extra even. And then the other thing that they changed, you can see there's kind of these ribs on it. They found in extremely humid environments that those ribs were actually starting to rub a little bit of hair off. So they went to completely smooth so that wouldn't happen anymore. So, I mean, they're very forward on trying to constantly redesign this product. It hasn't even been out and they're already redesigning parts of it. As they've seen, more and more users and what their feedback is. So everyone wants to talk cost. It sounds awfully high because it has a very high initial buy-in cost, but then extremely low operating cost, or annually. So each neck band is $250. If you opt for the low rot system, which is the base station model, it's $5,000 for each base station. Then the Wi-Fi station is $1,000. And then the monthly data charge, using the low rot system, it's only $1.50 per active neck band. So we have 10 that aren't on any animals right now. We're not getting charged the monthly charge for those. But for the the other 90 or so that are actually on animals, we pay $1.50 a month. It's up to you for payment schedule. If you want to pay once a year, you want to pay quarterly, you want to pay every month. They don't care. And then if you use just the cellular system, which has no base stations, it's a little bit higher of that monthly charge because there's more data traveling over the cellular network. That's about $2. So once you start kind of crunching the math, it's basically, if you have less than 100 animals, then that cellular system model, and you have the cell service for it, it actually starts to make more sense. But the moment you really get over 100 animals, it actually makes more sense to go to the base station model because you'll save more money in the long run. As long as you can bite off on that higher buy-in point. We paid for it all ourselves because we tried to talk to NRCS and World Wildlife Fund, and all that was just going to take way too long, and we weren't willing to wait that long because we were already doing AMP rotational grazing, where we moved them every 3 days with temporary electric fence, and we're working on huge acreages. The traditional is it takes 37 acres per cow. We're actually, with this, we could run a lot heavier than what we are right now, but because we have so much BLM and I haven't convinced them yet of the benefits of what we're doing. I've got a pasture watch scheduled with them here soon, but we're running about one animal per 20 acres. So we haven't cut it down a heck of a lot, but we have cut it down some. And we're just trying to, build up. So here's a few screenshots pulled, from the web app, just so the little tablet that I'm on doesn't get bogged down too much. You can do schedule moves. There's really, I haven't found a limit on how many schedule moves you can have. Where we were doing 3-day moves when we were using temporary electric fence, I started doing daily moves with eShepherd, and I'm actually now doing half-a-day moves with eShepherd because it's a solar, charged battery. I don't have to worry about battery life. They'll last. And we've seen great success at 12-hour moves. Really no issue. The only time 12-hour moves doesn't work quite so well is when I'm asking him to walk a long ways, because we are dealing with such big pastures, thousands of acres in a single pasture. And sometimes we don't have a lot of water source, and we got to ask them to walk a mile or two. And you can tell from the right-hand side, I've got 12-hour moves. And if I were to have scrolled down, the very last move, I have it set as basically until further notice. So that paddock will always stay on until I'm able to, turn the next sort of, grazing strip on for them. Here I've clicked on a single animal, and these are all the information that you can currently like plug into the system. You currently see. So its visual ID tag, the actual ear tag is 004. The Y just marks is just a note for us saying that's a yearling. The EID tag is the collar itself. That's the EID tag, and then if or excuse me, I misspoke. That is its bangs tag, the RFID bangs tag. And then the neckband ID is at the very top of the screen, right next to the single strength indicator, which is actually bugged out a little bit because all callers are saying that their single strength is way lower than what it actually is. It's something that they're working on trying to fix. You can also then see status, you can see history. Not a lot on the status page. That's built more for future capabilities than something that we would be using right now. So on this page, I've clicked on another animal and brought up the track feature, which will tell us everywhere she's been within whatever time frame that we've got. So right now I've basically just got a 24-hour period showing. You can have them show for all the way up to 7 days, but I just did 24 hours, so it didn't look too crazy. And then you can hover over, like underneath that green circle, you can actually hover over these points and it'll show she was in this spot at this time, within this virtual paddock, and give you a bit more information. And then in that right hand window, you can actually add different things to see in there. Like if I wanted to see the neckband IDs, I could do that. I could see which physical, like you could turn on, so it tells you which physical paddock they're in, all that. And you can see the different timing there is saying that it last updated. Most of those are, within 10 minutes, but there you can see one at the bottom. It hadn't talked to the base station saying where it was for nearly an hour. These are our unfitted neckbands, the ones that are just sitting at the barn waiting to get put on an animal. The main reason why I had this was just so I could kind of show what an alert looked like. And I've moused over an alert, and that's where it says the neckband is either dropped from the animal or the animal's no longer moving. And we've seen this actually help us and potentially save a few animals because, and in the past, they would have just died out in the pasture. We usually have always historically lost, a few throughout the year. We never knew why. We never knew if it was something that we could have, went and potentially saved them from. But like when I was talking about all those critters getting bogged down in the creek, this basically told us that, hey, something's wrong. They haven't been moving. And we were able to go out there and, get the tractor, put chains on them, rip them out of the creek. And other than the one that had already died, we saved the other 4, which is pretty awesome. This is trying to draw a virtual pasture. It'll tell you each individual length of the side, like each side. It'll tell you how long it is. Down at the bottom, it'll tell you how many acres. If you had something in there showing, that's why grazing area is there. It could be potentially different. You can do, so this is only an inclusion zone, but you can also do an exclusion zone. Say there's a hazard there or a piece of equipment you don't want them to go rub on. You could draw that in there so it'll keep them away and leave them alone. You do have to have like 50 meters clearance between an exclusion zone edge and inclusion zone edge. So like we've got our herd split into 2 breeding groups right now. One is for Hereford bull and the rest are for composite bulls. So this is a pretty small virtual paddock. So I wouldn't be able to draw an exclusion zone in this because I just don't have enough animals that require that much. And no, these animals aren't outside of the virtual paddock. I just was editing a random one to kind of show what it looks like. It's also nice that it kind of shows you a comparison to other virtual paddocks. That way, if you're trying to, as you draw like a new one, you're trying to only increase by roughly like say 3 acres because that's how much forage is in that new area. You can pretty easily get that done. And then if you were to draw an invalid paddock, it'll alert you saying, hey, you know, it's too great of an angle at this corner, or hey, you have no watering point in this, you know, basically saying you may not want to do this. If I can see if I've turned on a new virtual paddock or a scheduled move is turned on a new virtual paddock, I can see, you know, how far along the whole mob is at getting that update. So like here, every animal in this particular group has gotten the update. They're all green. I've never seen anything ever not be pending, confirmed, overridden, or canceled. I've never seen sent. Basically, as you turn on a new virtual paddock, they'll all be pending. As it's communicated that to the neck band, they'll go green, go to confirmed. And then once you turn on new paddock, it'll go to overridden. And then if you were ever to just turn off the virtual paddock, that's what canceled really is. You can put in different physical paddocks, landmarks, watering points. You know, I've got like gates annotated throughout our different pastures. I've got where the way station's annotated, buildings annotated, things like that. This is not how it actually looks. I was just doing a cross comparison of when you turn on the heat map, just because I thought it was neat that where that draw is, you can see that they spent so much more time in that draw because there's so much more grass. You can see a heat map all the way back, you know, for a total of 30 days or any chunk of those 30 days. So you can go fairly far back. And you can even have it essentially play like a video, kind of how Holly had it. There's clearly isn't quite as nice looking or smooth, but it's the same basic concept of you can have a playthrough to kind of see how they move through different, you know, areas within a virtual paddock. So to talk about the bad, so that bottom center is when I was talking about the break, them, you know, having that braking strength if they were to get caught on something. We've seen, I think, 3 or 4 break. And then in the bottom right, you actually see one that would have probably broke had we left her alone. And we had fitted that collar just way too loose. She was probably, you know, reaching up to scratch and got a hoof through. And we go out and check our stuff because we were, you know, brand new using the system, trying to learn it. We saw her really easy to get up there and basically fix it. That wasn't an issue, but it did demonstrate to us we definitely want to make sure that we don't, you know, get them too loose because something like that can happen. What's on the left is something that only we have seen. Really, the reps within East Shepherd have told us about. There's a place in Germany who have seen a little bit of the swelling, and then their actual test place in Australia has seen a little bit of it. They thought it was mostly due to neck bands just being fitted too loose. And while a lot of the ones that we saw develop this sort of swelling, or even the lumps in the more extreme cases, a lot of them were fitted too loose. There were some that were not. And after kind of analyzing the data, I found that not a single yearling had any of these problems, not a single one, and they were fitted to loose. Our heifers, which is actually the bottom left, that's a heifer. So she's a pretty young animal. They really didn't have hardly any swelling. It might just be a little bit. And then, and any age group besides the yearlings, there was never more than 20% that had any sort of swelling or lump at all. So only 20% had any like lump present at all or swelling present. But as you got older in the animals, the severity of that swelling or that lump was increased, which kind of led me, and after fielding this theory to Gallagher, they seem to agree that it's definitely one of the more likely scenarios is that based off of animal behavior on age is probably a much heavier factor. So our yearlings are just figuring out life. They're just, you know, figuring out how to graze. So that's probably why they don't. Those big lumps completely go away or have already gone down significantly. So we're kind of, you know, curious if, by the end of the year or even say next year, if that'll just kind of gone away for all of them, or if it might be still be present. We're curious to see if the yearlings ever develop any sort of swelling, or if they just figured out how to graze with this and they just never develop any of that swelling. So go to the good. We've saved multiple animals with this because it's told us something was wrong. It's allowed us to do very precise grazing. That's kind of what this photo is you can see on the right, that's where he grazed. On the left, they hadn't gotten open to it yet. We're doing 12-hour moves now with absolutely no ill effect, which means we are saving just so many man hours now that we don't have to move temporary electric fence anymore. We don't have any batteries to change out. We've never had a color, really have any problems. We do have one color that has potentially died. We haven't got that animal back in to know why. Her collar has been out of contact for about 4 or 5 days now. It just seems to not be talking. We've watched her walk through the virtual paddock, so I kind of have a hunch that the collar's just dead. And I just sent an email to Gallagher asking if they can see any more metrics on it, or what the course of fire is to go forward with that. But based off of previous discussions, they should just replace a color free of charge because it's under warranty. It's within the first year of it, which kind of then speaks to the awesome customer service. Here, I guess it'd be about 2 weeks ago, we don't know what happened. We believe a predator went by one of our mobs. It'd be the mob that has 60 animals in it, because using the tracks feature, I can see that at 6:09, the entire mob of 60 just broke out of the paddock, went straight south towards the creek. And they did it at a fast clip because there's no zigzagging. It's all just straight. And then as they kind of hit the creek, then they just were able to meander back towards the reservoir. They all recaught themselves within the virtual paddock. And we can only suspect that maybe like a mountain lion went through, because they typically don't have that sort of reaction to coyotes, because we have a fair number of coyotes and our cows just never care about them really. So I'm kind of wondering if a mountain lion might have went through. We don't see them a lot out on our north place, but can see them, and it's just a theory. I have no way of knowing. But and then parting shots. One of the neat things that we've been able to do that Gallagher didn't even know, how possible it was, because we're definitely pushing their system hard. They've told us that there's not a lot of people trying to do some of the things that we're trying to do with it, which they've been super stoked about. And then with the animal health, they were saying that not a lot of people give them that level of feedback that I've been giving them. I'm not trying to toot my own horn or anything. I'm just trying to help them develop the product so that I can use a better product. But we were able to sort one mob into two. We sorted them into two breeding groups. It went actually quite well. I learned some tips and tricks of how to do it better next time, but it still went really nice. After we branded everything, normally we would always, turn everything out into another corral so that everything could mother up. We didn't do that this time. We just, after we worked the cows, we turned them out into a virtual paddock, and then they all stayed there. And as we branded the calves, we essentially kicked them out, and they just paired up on their own out there. We didn't even know if that was going to be a disaster or not, but it worked very, very well. We have successfully collared one bull. We put it on our 3 black composite bulls. Our Hereford was just way too big, and we didn't know if it would be okay if we lengthen that chain. We now know from communication with Gallagher, they said as long as it's the same gauge of chain, we can lengthen it without any issue. But we didn't know that at the time. And then for the 3 collar bulls that we actually did, 2 of them, one broke, and the other one just somehow came off. And we don't know exactly how that happened. We don't know if maybe they got in a fight, and not at the same time, but we don't know if they got in fights that caused them to break / come off, or if maybe they're mounting or dismounting a cow. We can't tell that. We just know that for 2 it came off, and for 1 he's still out there. We watched him mount and dismount cows just fine, so he's breeding them just fine. And for whatever reason, he's kept it. Some of the future capabilities that is coming down the pipe. return to paddock is the soonest one. It's actually already essentially a live feature. It just hasn't been turned on for us. And it's because we don't have the Wi-Fi station yet. Basically, the Wi-Fi station is just something that you put either at a water source or in your corrals. And as the animals walk by it, all these collars have Bluetooth, and it's meant really for future, capabilities, such as, potentially putting some sort of something on like a calf that then acts as a mesh network to let you know where all the calves are as well. But right now, the Bluetooth isn't really being used for much other than the Wi-Fi station. It'll talk to it and essentially update the firmware. So when they finally get us the Wi-Fi station, we send all our animals walking by it, and we'll have the return to paddock feature, which is basically if an animal gets out, it will herd them back to the paddock all on their own, which basically works as if they're pointing in the right direction, it leaves them alone. If they point the wrong direction, it plays the audio tone for them. And if they start walking in the wrong direction, that's when they would get a stimulus. But as long as they're basically going the general direction of the virtual paddock, it'll leave them alone and let them go back. And then some of the other things we talked about would be pregnancy detection and calving detection that would most likely be just off animal behavior. And then it would take a whole redesigned collar, but one of the things that they want to do is get into animal health. Being able to do heat detection, knowing if it's sick or not, that sort of thing. And that's pretty much all I got.
Awesome. So there are a couple questions in the chat. Just looking. Oh, so Aaron asked, does anyone couple any of these with remote cameras? So that would be a question for Brandon and.
We do not as the moment now.
Okay.
So no, we don't have like any remote cameras. We do now, especially with this, we actually started using a drone a whole lot more, and it was mainly to go check, the water to make sure that they still had water because it's such a dry year, and then to check on how the calves were kind of interacting as we've been moving the cows. Because especially when they were calving, that was a big question of, if we go to move them, are they essentially just going to leave that calf behind because they can't get back to it? Because, they lay down brand new calves and they don't go back to it till the end of the day sometimes. And we just found that smaller, very small incremental moves was kind of the key there. That way, if she did do that, she could get back to the edge and call the calf and have it walk. We never had any problem. So we used a drone a bit there. We haven't really thought about using like kind of remote cameras to try and figure out some of these odd behaviors or odd things that we've seen. That's actually a great suggestion. We might think about doing that. Also, because I see the learning phase, our cows were they had figured it out. Like we did a training paddock where one side was actually high tensile electric and then temporary electric on the other side. So they only had one virtual boundary. They figured it out in like 48 hours. And then we just slowly got a little bit more and more complicated. And like within 70 days, their audio to pulse ratios, because that's another thing that you can see, it'll never go below 50% because they always get at least one audio tone before a stimulus. And they say like, hey, leave them in a training paddock scenario until they get really upwards of that 80%. And we saw the vast majority hit that 80% within, like I said, 2 to 3 days. There was a few that were stubborn or just never really interacted with virtual boundaries, and they took upwards of like a week, but nothing more than a week.
Aaron, do you just want to explain what you mean by the human
Yeah,
learning?
sorry. I was just thinking as we're all kind of learning about this new technology, because I don't think, having remote cameras out on some of these landscapes for the long term makes sense, but like just to learn like what it means when your cows move funny or something odd happens, like just a couple that information so that in the future you might be able to. So it's more of a human learning piece of all this versus the cow learning piece of this. And that like, hey, this one time, they all moved in this section, and if there's a consistency to that, if cameras can help better understand that. That's sort of where I was going with that.
Yeah, I think that would be super helpful, especially, those of us in northern Montana and northern states are looking at virtual fencing and predators, wolves and grizzly bears, and if we could really keep track of like all your cows ran to the southern end of the pasture for whatever reason, then if you have a camera out there, then it's because there was a grizzly bear out there or a pack of wolves or whatever. And then I'm looking at like how to maybe adjust these virtual fences then to say, okay, clearly there's something in that area all week. Let's fence them out of that area so none of them get eaten while they're in that pasture. So is that something that you guys have seen with any of your people? I mean, obviously you don't have grizzly bears and wolves in southern Montana, southeast Montana.
Yeah.
Hi.
I don't typically cover Montana, so I could not answer that question for you. But could you reword that at the beginning?
So I just want to know, like, mostly I would like to know if there's anyone in your company that has experience, in any of these companies that has experience with people using virtual fencing in areas with high apex predator populations like grizzly bears and wolves, and how they've utilized these virtual fences to avoid those conflicts.
I am going to, after this, I'll get you in contact with John Abizade, who runs that area and deals with a lot of the Forestry Service and BLM projects on that. And he will definitely be able to update you on how they use that.
Perfect. Perfect.
I
And
have a little bit. Oh, sorry.
I could give you Charles' contact information. He's essentially the North American head honcho for eShepherd. And if they've seen anything like that or know anything about it, he'd probably be able to answer your question.
Perfect. Perfect. I'm
Yeah,
just
I've
scrolling
got
through the chat because there's been some discussion in there. I might want to make sure we don't miss anything.
Trina, real quick.
Yeah.
Can you all hear me okay? Sorry, I'm in at another meeting right now. I heard that I was echoing earlier, so just checking. Okay,
Oh,
good to
you're
go. So I was in touch with a range rider who works on some allotments with virtual fencing. And they've been using it to, I guess, augment their herd monitoring. They were able to detect a collar that had stayed still, that had kind of broken the boundary, and went and investigated and determined it to be a depredation. And then we're able to call in folks for that investigation. And so I think there's a lot of application here where you have range riders or folks out monitoring cattle more consistently to have, I guess, an easier way to monitor large herds in open range land context. But once again, it's like these are a lot of input, time, labor, cost that gets there. But I think there could be a good application overlap. I know there's a fellow in Idaho too who's thinking along these lines. Lane, I think he might be on this call, is working with him to think about scaling up that effort in Idaho. But yeah, I think it's a real application or opportunity to explore more. And a lot of folks are starting to think along those lines.
Do we have any other questions, comments, concerns about virtual fencing? Go ahead, Travis. If you're talking, we can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
You can hear me now? Okay, good. Good. Okay. So I was just kind of pitching in to say I'm Travis Bramer. I'm from PERC. And we are really interested in virtual fencing. We have funding available to help anybody who wants to use virtual fencing in Montana or Wyoming, Idaho. So lots of great opportunities. And to the predator question, we're working with a ranch to explore what it would look like to use virtual fencing to keep cattle out of tall larkspur areas or areas of high willow density to avoid grizzly bear interactions. But we're not to the point yet of testing that. That'll be a next year project, but we're definitely trying to explore that and see what the options are there. Anyway, there's a lot there, but we're really interested and really appreciate all these conversations. And thanks again for putting this together, Trina Joe.
Yeah, I think this conversation has a lot more to it. I mean, it was awesome to see how the things actually work, but I think moving forward, we need to figure out exactly how we can utilize these virtual fences beyond time saving and manpower saving, which I mean is a great use, but also what else they can be used for. So we'll keep this discussion going, and we'll keep figuring out how we can do that. One question, how much do these collars weigh?
Ours are just a little over 2 pounds.
Okay.
For E-Shepherd, it's surprisingly light for what it looks like, but I think when we weighed it, it was about like 6 pounds. So, it's obviously a little heavier than say like the vents or the I think the no fence is also pretty light, but we haven't seen too much ill effects for that yet, but we'll see.
Is there a reason that they're so big? Like both the vents and the E-Shepherd look like they're massive. So is there a reason that they're so big? Is that just the battery?
Talking about vents?
Both of them, yeah. But go
Yeah,
ahead.
I mean, ours are just, I mean, the battery's just a lithium battery about this big, but I mean, the circuit boards and stuff inside is kind of why we had to have it that big. So,
Okay.
And then for E-Shepherd, basically the same answer. It's just like the old design was actually smaller, but and that's because of just how they had the solar panels. But and part of the reason why it's as big as it is just because they need that solar panel area on each side. But in terms of like the battery internally and then like the different circuit boards and stuff, that's kind of the other reason. But
Makes sense.
There's your $1 million, Trina. You make them into an ear tag size.
I'm just thinking, like where I live on a creek on the Rocky Mountain front in Montana. So I mean, our cows would they'd rip them off every single day, I think, just because we have so much brush and so much crap that they crawl through. So it's just interesting to look at and see if those would work. Lori.
Yeah, I would just say, I mean, as the technology gets better, I will say, our collars used to be huge too, and they've gotten way smaller. So I think that as these companies continue to grow or to refit how the collar works, you will see probably some shrinkage in the size of the collar, which will help, I'm sure. So
yeah, because if you see our collars from 4 years ago, I mean, you wouldn't even think they were from vents. So I mean, we like to talk about it as first iPhone came out, now where's the next iPhone at? I mean, the technology is going to expand.
It's going to get better.
Every company. So
yeah.
Lori, maybe that could be a side gig for you to work with these livestock collars and show them how the bear collars work, and you could totally do it. You could change
I'm already doing technical support for Telonics. I'm good with for all of our bear specialists.
Okay, well, we are at noon, so if we don't have any more questions, I think let's just keep this conversation rolling. You guys can get that information to me, and I will reach out to those guys and figure out what I need to know, and then I will share it with everyone else, and we will keep moving forward. But thank you, Holly and Ty and Brandon, for spending a couple hours with us today. That was very helpful.
yep, thanks for having us.
You bet. Thank you.
Thanks,
All right,
everybody.
we'll
Thanks
see
for
you guys.
organizing.
Yeah, we'll see you guys at the next meeting. All right.